Adam, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, your colleagues at the National Post recently broke a story about fake visas. Can you walk us through exactly what they uncovered?
Sure. So, my colleagues work with the Investigative Journalism Bureau, which is a nonprofit that focuses on producing in depth reporting. And they looked into this practice where some Indian communities in Canada sell fake visas so that people can, immigrate to Canada under false pretenses. Or on top of that, they can smuggle people from Canada to the United States or from the United States to Canada. So what they discovered is that there is an entire ecosystem of people openly advertising these services online on social media. And the price seems to be about 4,000 Canadian dollars to be smuggled across the US Canadian border and about $40,000 to be smuggled into Canada using a fake visa. Now, one thing I want to clarify is that these visas, some of them seem to be legitimate visas that are issued under false pretenses, and some of them seem to be just fully fraudulent. So for the ones that are fully fraudulent, essentially the idea is that someone can use this visa to fly to Canada, but when they get at customs, the visa will likely be discovered as being fake. And then at that point, the migrant can then claim asylum right away. And what that means is that they are automatically put on a long waiting list for their case to be adjudicated. And that means that they can live in Canada for years while their asylum case is seen, and they can find other ways to kind of like slow down the process. And during that time, they have access to a large number of social supports that Canada offers. So obviously that system is, pretty vulnerable to abuse. Now, for the legit visas that are issued using false documents, essentially what happens is that these smugglers will forge pay stubs, letters of employment, bank statements to give the impression that, let's say, a farmer from the middle of Punjab is actually a professor who has a large amount of money in his bank. And then they're able to use that, sometimes in partnership with some fraudulent officials who are working in India to get these visas. And then they use that to, get into Canada. And then once they have entry into Canada, they can either claim asylum again or, claim to be a worker at some point. There are all sorts of different options available. Now, when it comes to the smuggling, essentially what happens is that these smugglers will organize a pickup over the phone. They'll say, for example, that we can get you from Montreal to upstate New York or from Toronto into some other US location. So they pick you up in a van, and then the van drives you to the US border at some point where it is not really well monitored, and then they drop you off, and then you're supposed to cross over, and then a different smuggling team will pick you up on the US side or the Canadian side, depending where you're starting, and then take you to the final destination. So these investigative reporters engaged in long chats with these smugglers and actually arranged for a fake pickup at one point. So the smugglers came to pick them up. The journalists were just observing in a car nearby, and then they took some photos of the smuggler as he came out of the car. The smuggler was messaging them saying, "Hey, where are you?" They said, "Oh, we're not ready. We changed our mind." And then it seems like the smuggler noticed that he was being photographed because he later messaged them saying, "Why did you photograph the car?" Now, one thing I want to clarify is that the people that the journalists were messaging, they were not the same person as the driver. So it suggests that this is a sophisticated system where you have people who are coordinating and you have actual drivers. So this is not just, a 1 or 2 person operation. Then on top of that, for these investigative journalists, when they looked at the social media accounts that are associated with some of these advertisements, they identified a few key individuals who were quite recurring. And sometimes these individuals would pose with guns, which suggests that there is an element of violence that is associated with these operations, which is not surprising because this is fundamentally human trafficking. Now, I really want to emphasize here that for the people who were involved in the smuggling operations, they seem to overwhelmingly be Indian and overwhelmingly Punjabi. And this is something that the journalists were able to ascertain on the basis of what language these smugglers were speaking. And then, of course, for example, the guy who came out of the car in that sting operation, if I recall correctly, he was also wearing, a turban because he was Sikh.
And what has been the reaction to this story and the reaction to the issue of illegal immigration in Canada?
It's a mixed reaction, so I wouldn't be able to talk about the reaction to the story because I can't quantify that, but I do know that it did quite well on the National Post website. It seemed to be one of our trending topics. But in terms of public reaction, I mean, there's a partisan split here where many conservatives see that this is a problem and they think that it's a problem that should be fixed as soon as possible because our immigration system is obviously broken. However, on the liberal side, while they understand that there is a problem with our immigration system in general, and while they are pushing for some level of reform, there seems to be a reluctance to fully grasp the degree of fraud that we're experiencing. And sometimes when you talk about immigration fraud, some liberal influencers or politicians will say that you're being racist or that this is insensitive, even though, for the most part, people don't care what nationality is coming into the country to immigrate, so long as you do it properly and so long as you are educated and can bring something to the country. But committing a crime and coming in illegally is not racist. It's not racist to say that that's bad. It's just common sense.
Now, you've been fairly critical of a recent case where a Jamaican family was denied asylum. Can you explain what was missing from the original story?
Sure. So, I've been commenting a lot on immigration recently and questionable asylum claims and other forms of fraud. Now, I want to clarify here that I can't say that this is fraud because we don't know exactly what's happening. But the facts of the case are that there was a Jamaican family that came to Canada and then they claimed asylum. And their argument was that the father would face political violence in Jamaica if he were to return because he was supposedly a critic of the government. So an immigration officer then reviewed the case and found that there was insufficient evidence to illustrate that the father would actually face any kind of political violence back home. Um, and so the asylum case was denied. And what this suggests, is that this is maybe not a legitimate asylum case, especially considering that Jamaica, while it is not as nice of a country as Canada, it is not like Haiti or not like Syria, right? It's part of the Commonwealth. You have you have people vacationing in Jamaica. So the idea that people would claim asylum from Jamaica kind of, stretches credulity. um, but what happened is that CP24 then did a story on this, and I thought it was a quite useful example of media bias and a case study in irresponsible reporting, because the story was written as a sob story, saying, "Look how sad it is that this family is being deported," and only deep into the story, towards the end, on the 15th paragraph, does the reader learn that an immigration officer found that there was insufficient evidence. I'm a journalist and a columnist, and if I were writing this story, and the question is whether or not someone should be deported, I would put at the very top the fact that the Canadian government did not find evidence that they would face a threat at home.
And how will the immigration debate shape up now that Parliament has returned?
So previously, the Conservatives were all about crime, inflation. I mean, inflation is mostly under control. Crime is still abhorrent in Canada. But the immigration issue, people are really getting tired of. And what I mean by that, they're getting tired of the abuse that we see here. I mean, we used to have a cross-partisan consensus that immigration is good, but the Trudeau government managed to destroy that in a few years by bringing millions of people who didn't really bring anything to the table, who weren't educated, who were generally scamming the system, fake international students, and people are tired. And they feel like the integrity of their country is being undermined. No one likes to see, for example, how temporary foreign workers are now replacing young Canadians in chain restaurants like Tim Hortons, and how this is all being facilitated through abuse and fraud. And so the Conservatives seem to sense that there is a political opportunity here. So I would imagine that this debate will only intensify going forward.